1, 2, 3. Cool.
Hey.
All right. Glasses off. Water. Delicious. I'm using my front camera, so bear with me. I have a story, okay? Don't worry. I'm getting a haircut tomorrow, so you can just got my COVID mask. Got that. Keep that on me. I keep that thing on me, literally, physically. So my roommate has a typewriter. I like it because I like writing, and I like typing better than I like writing with a pen. So I type stuff on it, and I was typing goofy stuff on it, and I like the fact that it goes from my brain to a physical entity by me typing. And then I typed this one story, and I put it in this folder. It says stories. I think it's backwards for this front-facing camera, but we'll deal with it. People ask me, they say, Michael, what are you doing? What are you doing during COVID? I have been sad during COVID. So I've been writing fiction, and this is kind of fiction. And we're gonna try to read this. I've had some coffee today. I would do what the kids do, where they go, okay, so this isn't very good, or I had these ideas, and I don't know if they'll work entirely. Yeah, no, I'm not gonna do that stuff. I just want to get this recorded. I have so much anxiety about this, not only because I'm reading this and sharing this on the internet, but also I care about this a lot. I'm gonna read this, all right? Hey, she said, snapping her fingers in my face. It's your turn. I know. Just thinking, he said, hand cupping his chin. But he still hadn't a clue where he would move, even though it had been 10 minutes. She grew impatient, head resting on her right hand as she leaned on the armrest. She let out a groan so long he stopped focusing on the game. Can I make this any easier on you? Or am I also going to have to bear with your complaining as long as you're here? He leaned back and crossed his arms, contempt replacing his pensive attitude. Oh, I'd love to leave any time you'd want, but that's not an option now, is it? She paused for emphasis, knowing the remark would sting. It worked too well. He began to cry. Her tone softened. Wait, she leaned forward, placing a gentle hand on his patchy, thin head of hair as he laid his arms, weeping, on the table. I'm sorry, that was really mean. I just have been playing this game for a while now, and it would be a lot more fun if we could play a different one. He picked his head up off the table and wiped his face with his shirt. His puffy eyes stared at the board game in front of them. Can we at least finish this one before we change games? He said, throat hoarse. She gave a short sigh and dropped her shoulders in disappointment. But seeing his pitiful flush face brought sympathetic patience that slightly outweighed her boredom and frustration. Fine, she said with a smirk and a sigh. But I get to pick the next game, and you've got to make your turns less than 2 minutes. 3 minutes. His voice perked up at her agreement to keep playing. Fine, she smiled. 3 minutes and not a second more. The game lasted another hour and a half, but time seemed to move faster with the determination to finish and have fun from the two of them. When it ended, the game evaporated, as it always did when the kids got bored. They both made eye contact and smiled. One excited to have the power of choice, the other the excitement of anticipating the mysterious next game. She walked to the edge of their carpeted island and looked for the games. Where's the shelf? She grabbed at the air, but was only met with a high school memory. She held its gelatin-like form in her hand. Are these your friends? They were, he said, rising from his chair. He was shorter than the table, his arms thinner than one of the legs on the table. I knew them years ago. That was back when I acted on stage. He touched the memory, and it played back for her to see. An older, taller boy, somewhat resembling him, wore a polka dot tie and a clown's red nose. I played an imaginary character. The lead's character couldn't get anyone else to see us, but the other clown and I kept annoying her. We stuck around until the lead character died. That's when the play ends. She looked at him. He grew taller as he told the story. Voice grew deeper, and his hair grew full, no longer patchy or short. She lifted up the memory and watched it float away into the rest of the mind space. Her face drained of enthusiasm as she stared out into the colorful, musical void. He noticed. "You don't annoy me. You are not a clown," he said, placing a gentle hand on her bald head. Some of the veins protruded through her skin, like a rotten grape. He grew taller as he consoled her. His facial hair sprouted. "But you're stuck with me until you die. Until both our stories end." Her voice was toneless, matter of fact, cold. She walked back to the table, unable to see over it, and climbed upon the chair, feet dangling. He joined her across the table, his boots firmly on the carpet as he sat. "I stopped seeing you as a burden long ago. You're my friend. You've stuck with me through everything, even death and loss of friends and family. I'd be so much more alone without you." He reached above their heads and snagged a memory, this one more solid than the last. He placed it on the table, facing her. She leaned forward and took the slow-moving picture of the two of them. "I love this one," she smiled. "In your first year of college, you sat on this bench and wrote to me." He smiled at her as she touched the memory, watching the image ripple like a pond. "That's right. And where are you in this one?" "Right next to you," she said, through a full grin, swinging her feet in excitement under the table. He stood and rounded the table, kneeling next to her and pointing at the memory. "And do you know where I keep that notebook with that letter I wrote you?" He toned his voice in an infectious enthusiasm one would use to get a child excited for going to Disney, or a dog going for a walk. "Where?" she said, whipping her head to face him, genuine curiosity on her face. He stood up and pointed to a room, his current bedroom, lit by only a desk lamp. The drawer of the desk opened, and out across the ethereal mindscape floated the moleskin journal. She jumped out of her seat. "You still have it?" she yelled as she reached for the journal that sailed into her hand. "I thought you would have thrown it away." As she began to read, he stood and looked over her shoulder. "I keep all my journals, especially the ones I wrote with you around." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes and said, "I thought you wanted to forget me ever since you noticed me following you," she sniffled. "I did at first, but after I really paid attention to you, I realized you weren't so bad." He sat down next to her, legs crossed. Sitting, he was her same height while she stood. He pulled a pair of glasses out of his shirt pocket and put them on. His beard was red. "Not so bad," she frowned at him, then laughed and sat down next to him. She crossed her legs too and handed him the journal before laying her head on his arm. His bicep was double the size of her calf, and she held out her forearm to compare how pale she was to him. Her skin seemed almost transparent. His was pale, but naturally so. He summoned scenery to give them something to look at. He chose a beach. The waves crashed halfway to the shore, where the tide lapped gently upon the darkened sand. The sun was setting behind them. He had never left the East Coast before. The dimming horizon seemed still, despite time surely shuffling on. "Why," she asked, "do you always think of me when you see beautiful things? Doesn't it make your day worse? I mean, doesn't it make you sad when you think of dead people?" Her hands were playing with her shoelaces as she looked up at his 20-something-year-old face. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on his knees, resting his head in his hands. "Actually," he said, after a deep breath, "I think it makes the day better, and the scenery sweeter." "What? Really?" She leaned back in shock. "Yeah, the sunny day or the sunset, or things like a waterfall or full moon, all seem sweeter with you on my mind. I just think, what if you were there with me, experiencing that spectacular sight?" He began to cry again, but it wasn't like before. He didn't try to hide his tears or cover his face. He let the tears flow. He stopped fighting long ago. She hugged his arm tight and said, "But now you're crying. Why do you think of me if it makes you cry?" He wiped his face with one of the tissues from the pack he kept in his pocket and smiled at her. "Because I'm so lucky to have lived to see such a thing, and thinking of you makes me understand how rare it is." "How rare what is?" she asked, almost whispering. "That someone like me could be there." He lowered his gaze, staring at nothing. "The most beautiful part of scenes like that isn't the beauty before me. It's the beauty that is me. My existence is as much of a miracle as a mountain range or an early morning constellation in the night sky, maybe even less probable. Because on top of the wonder I see with my eyes, the even more wonderful truth is that a man that could have died as a boy from a cancer that came and went before he had ever read a word of poetry, could legibly write his name, or form a coherent thought, was, in that moment, witnessing a glimpse into a future where he had almost not participated. You remind me how radiant the world shines, even when it's overcast. Because a day full of gloom is one I get to see. And anyone who shares those moments with me is witnessing two intersecting monuments of nature that, if only a few details slightly changed, would have withered away, never to be discovered by anyone. You helped me see myself in a humble light. I love remembering you." She stared at him with an open mouth. He looked so much older, but he did not truly age. She did not know what an older him would look like, for he had yet to grow past his 20-something age. "But," she said, tugging at his sleeve, "doesn't it hurt to think about all that? Why would you want to feel that way?" The beach had turned to night. The full moon lit the sand a soft blue-white glow, and clouds slowly passed in front of the silver marble. He stared at the memorized scenery and took a breath in and took a breath out. "I can't help it." His glasses reflected the moonlight, slightly obscuring his eyes. "Even when I try not to think about the time in the hospital or life as a kid in school who's too tired to participate in activities, or you, I get overwhelmed eventually. It's actually," he stretched his legs, hanging them over their island, letting them dangle above colorful oblivion, when I try to avoid thinking about you that it's hardest. She stood and jumped on his back, hanging from his neck. It's because I'm bored and want someone to play with. He laughed and stood, her still on his back. She screamed with delight as he spun around and ran around their carpeted island with a lone table accompanied by only 2 chairs. He made sounds of a car engine as he ran, using the attempted sounds of tires screeching as he rounded a corner. Eventually, he got tired and sat her down on the edge of the table and turned to face her, both of them laughing. You are a silly goose, he said. I am not a goose, you are, she said. I know you are, but what am I? A goose, she said, pointing. Well, I guess we're a couple of geese then, he said, hands on his hips. She giggled and swung her feet again, excited and giddy. Do you still want to play a game with me? She had grown earnest suddenly, uncertain if he would take the time any longer to give her more attention. He over-exaggerated an expression of him thinking, obviously joking. With one hand on his chin, the other on his waist, and his torso angled upward with his head, considering his options. I don't know. You didn't like the last one we played. She wiggled anxiously on the table edge and said, Please? I had a good one I thought about that we could play. Is it Pokemon Monopoly? He asked with a raised eyebrow. Shocked, she said, Yeah, how did you know? She was standing on the table, and she grabbed the board game from above them off a shelf passing by like a cloud. She began to set up the game from her chair. He chuckled and sat down across from her. Lucky guess. They began to play, rolling dice, neither knowing when it would end. That's my story. I don't really know how to end this. Thank you for sitting through that. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you enjoyed it. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye. Oh, man.